Justin Williams joins us. Good to have him. Wrote the article, Return of the Bagman. NIL clearinghouse could revive paying college athletes under the table. He's written a lot of stuff. Covers college football, the Big 12, and much more for theathletic.com. Justin, thank you very much for your time. What's been the reaction to your story about bringing up the boogeyman?
It's been interesting. I think there's a certain corner or certain corners of college sports, college football that wouldn't mind going back to the days of the bagman. And honestly, I think there's some people in college sports that may, even in the industry a little cynically, who are like, when it was kind of out of sight, out of mind, and whether we were pretending it wasn't happening or didn't realize it was happening, maybe it was a little bit easier to just kind of go about your day. But I definitely think there's, with the settlement in general, there's kind of these two camps. There's those who are really invested in the settlement and have put a lot of work and effort into it, and they want it to work, and they're kind of frustrated by the skepticism and the cynicism that's out there. And then there's that other group that is really just looking at the history of college sports and feel like, well, we only have this basis to go on, and it hasn't worked in the past, or there hasn't been any significant changes like that. So I think you're seeing the push and pull with things like this or anything related to the settlement.
Justin, leave it up to the NCAA to kind of mess up a settlement in the first place and make it take longer than it should have. And then immediately after they finally get it done, realize that the biggest thing that they've been trying to get out, they might have unleashed again. I mean, that's I think where this College Sports Commission is going to have to really make some strong rules that will not get challenged to make it work. What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, so that the people that are invested in this and that have put it together, they believe in it. And they've been saying all along, maybe they haven't been out there on social media or just kind of, being loud about it, but they believe this is going to work. Well, now we're going to have to see it. And some of that might be, they feel like they have to stand behind it. I think there is some concern or just anxiety to see if it actually will work now that it's in practice. But you mentioned the College Sports Commission. This is not the NCAA. This is actually pulling a lot of responsibility and oversight away from the NCAA. And the way it's being sold by those involved is this is different. It's going to act faster. It's going to have a little bit more latitude. It's going to have some more teeth to it. And for those out there that doubt it, I think the only thing that would really change that opinion is the first time the College Sports Commission has a chance to kind of come down on something, whether it catches someone breaking the rule or whether it wants to kind of push the envelope of, you have to abide by this settlement. We'll see what that punishment looks like. If it comes out and it has a pretty strict punishment and, whoever gets dinged with it can really feel it, then it might actually put a little bit of, fear or at least, kind of falling in line into these people that are skeptical or speaking out about it right now. But honestly, we won't really know what that looks like until it happens because it's also new.
In regards to that, I know there's just so many details that we still don't have an idea on yet, but in order to be punished, you had to agree to opt in, right? And sign hey, we're a part of this. And so if you get punished, you can't turn around like so many schools have done previously and sue this entity like they did with the NCAA, right? So if you're even in line to get punished, that means you have agreed to be punished and you can't turn around and say, no, that's not with the rules.
Yeah, so we'll give a hypothetical example. An athlete signs an NIL deal that, would have come through a collective. That's the way it's been going the past couple of years. This new clearinghouse overseen by the College Sports Commission says, actually, under the settlement, this isn't allowed. We're going to deny this deal. The athlete can't sue the College Sports Commission because they've opted out of that by being a class member of the settlement. The colleges, at least as we understand, aren't going to be able to sue because they've signed these participation affiliation agreements. They've basically kind of signed on to the settlement. Now, that doesn't prevent a collective or an outside company or organization from bringing a complaint or a lawsuit. It doesn't prevent, state attorneys general from maybe bringing a lawsuit. That's where we've seen some of this in the past. Now, those in the industry might say, well, when the Tennessee Attorney General went after the NCAA, maybe the University of Tennessee was either nudging it or not discouraging it. And maybe under these new rules, the University of Tennessee is going to say, hey, let's lay off. But I think that's the biggest question of the settlement. It's definitely going to change things. Schools are paying athletes. But the big thing everyone wants to know is, will this new NIL clearinghouse work as it's supposed to? And I think until we have someone either test the clearinghouse or the clearinghouse, finds a problem with the deal, we're not going to actually know what that looks like.
Saw some reports today, some columnists that have been covering the legal part of all of this, which a lot of it is legal, that mentioned even some athletes who were texted or contacted today don't know anything about NIL Go, don't know anything about a deadline, don't know anything about anything. And every school, of course, is going to have to help those athletes along the way. How long is it going to take for all of that to get where it needs to go?
The Lumi Charge is an all-in-one home desk lamp, speaker, and phone charger. It is a great holiday gift for students. And guess what? Everybody in our studio audience is going home with the Lumi Charge all-in-one desk lamp. This desk lamp retails for $100.
That's amazing. I need that for my son when he goes off to college.
That's kind of an interesting part of this, and that's why, I think maybe this whole like the return of the bagman. I've talked to some recruiting staffers who have said like, we're not going to tell an athlete to, break the rules or to not declare an NIL deal, but they also maybe haven't talked to their athletes at all about the settlement or this whole clearinghouse kind of thing. They're almost, just stepping back and saying, hey, whatever happens, happens. If they want to declare, great, so they're not going to, basically inculcate themselves, but they're also not out there saying like, hey, you need to make sure if you sign a deal that you declare it. And then on the same side, that's, the agent side, there's some questions of, are agents telling their athletes, hey, don't declare a deal or don't do it honestly, or are they not saying anything at all? So part of this is an education aspect. You're right. And it is going to fall back on the schools at some point. So I do think they're going to have to decide like, hey, we need to educate our athletes on how to do this and why it's important. But we go back to that first kind of punishment gets handed down. The first person that gets, wrapped up in this is they're going to declare ignorance, or they're going to say, hey, we didn't know the rules. We didn't know how this works. I'm really sorry. Is the College Sports Commission going to say, okay, we get it. This is new. This is early. We're not going to get you in trouble? Because then how long is that excuse going to work? So this is all kind of like the delicate balance. I understand why so many schools are really buying in, and at the administrative level, why they want to make it work. But then I also think you can see from the other side why maybe a little bit lower down, coaches, recruiting staffers, things like that, it's a little bit harder to get them to kind of buy in.
Well, I would say that the fastest way to get sued, again, is to try to do your old things where there was no nuance. It was just punish, punish, punish. And so if they want to do that and show, like, if they want to have a show of force, I think that will backfire on them, as opposed to saying, like, look, we know this thing is supposed to start on June 7th, for the deals. Even though we don't have any exact rules in place because of the delay in the settlement and how long it took, we're going to give everybody a 6-month grace period to figure this out as we write the actual rules. Because I think wouldn't it be dumb to just be like, oh, well, you didn't submit your thing on June 9th. And here we go. Now you're in trouble. You've lost eligibility.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably, like you said, it would probably bring some type of a complaint or lawsuit from someone. But again, it goes back to until, the College Sports Commission and the clearinghouse, until it shows that it has that teeth, that oversight, that enforcement that it's kind of been promising, then I don't think it's going to scare or encourage or, get anyone to go along with it. So this is part of the balance where, all right, if the bagman comes back and schools or recruiting departments or whatever, boosters are working on their own and they're paying athletes under the table, how hard does the College Sports Commission want to go out and find that and ding someone for it? Because then if you do, then yeah, maybe you're inviting a lawyer or an organization from the outside to say, hey, how are you limiting what, my client, my athlete can earn? And so it's kind of like there's some danger on both sides of this for everyone, when really those that made it are kind of just hoping that everyone will get along and follow the rules. But we know from the history of college sports that doesn't always work that way.
Justin, we've got, people who watch this show are obviously diehard college football fans, because you're on YouTube watching college sports talk in the middle of the offseason, middle of the summer. But yesterday there was a report that came out. On3 was talking about Texas Tech and how they're going to spend like $55 million on athletics heading into next year. And there was a bunch of people like, well, what about the cap? Like, we just heard about this cap. Where is this coming from? Can you explain that they just basically got that in under this agreement, right? And then how does that work now moving forward? Because, yeah, you are paying a softball pitcher $1 million, and I could see where that adds up to 30, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to be that free and breezy and easy like it was prior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this past offseason, really since the college football transfer portal in December, you've heard a lot about these front-loaded NIL deals. So basically, these collectives before the settlement hit and before there's going to be this new oversight and trying to stamp out these old school collective deals, they were emptying the coffers, basically like, let's sign all these deals. And then, some schools are either going to also pay out their rev share money. Some of them are even going to kind of like hold on to it. So, hey, we paid our 2025 roster with these front loaded deals. Now we're going to save our rev share until the transfer portal opens again in December or something like that. So a lot of kind of creative or, using loopholes, however you want to put it, is going on right now. And that's why you saw reports of, Texas Tech. I think there was reports that the Texas football team could, be worth up $40 million this year or something like that. The thing that's interesting is, all right, now let's go ahead to 2026, where allegedly you will not be able to have these front loaded deals. So you're going to go to that $20.5 million cap that covers everything. So for football, at most maybe $15 million. We just heard that Ohio State won the national championship last year. Their AD publicly said that the football roster was worth about $20 million in NIL. Do we really expect that some of these rosters, some of these athletic departments are actually going to cost less next year and the year after than they did last year and this year? That's where I think you get into kind of this, it's really odd or hard to accept that some of these dollar figures are going to start going backwards because of the settlement. And that's where you get into the over the cap deals or the under the table payments. And so I'm with you. Yeah, the numbers might be overinflated this year because of that front-loaded NIL deals, but do we really believe that they're going to start going backwards next year? I don't know.
How many? Go ahead, Craig. You had go ahead, Paul.
Chris Vanini brought this up the other day, and I'm sure you saw it. How do you feel about, or what do you think about the potential of not? It was described as tanking. It's not really tanking, but the decision that, okay, you've got $15 million to spend on your football roster, school to school max. Now, not everybody's going to do that, but say you are Michigan State and you can't get the quarterback that you want, you've got more holes than you can fill, and you just decide, look, damn the torpedoes, we're going to it's $20 million for the year, not $20 million per semester. So you can roll some money over and technically have a $25 million roster next year if you do it the right way, because you couldn't get what you wanted and then just go heavy in the December portal.
Yeah, I wrote about this in my piece over the weekend. Obviously it hasn't happened yet, but this is something that people in the industry are talking about as basically kind of rev share manipulation or cap manipulation. So yeah, if say, you have some injuries or you just miss on a couple positions and you feel like your team's not going to be competitive this year, maybe your coach is in a secure spot and the staff feels good and you're like, all right, we're not going to go all out this year. We're going to see how we do, but maybe we just save a little bit more than we were planning to. So we have a little bit extra when the transfer portal opens, or in, high school recruiting for next year. So we can make a little bit bigger of a splash. Or honestly, like the kind of, I don't know, even less palatable version of this is there's starting to be these GMs that are hired that are on the same level as the head coach, or maybe even above the head coach, like Andrew Luck firing the coach at Stanford. So what if you're a GM and your coach is on the hot seat and you feel like he's not going to win this year? Do you withhold some of that NIL money to make a bigger splash in the portal and maybe even be more attractive to the next coach you hire? Because you're like, hey, coach, we're fully loaded with our rev share money for next season. That's not stuff that I like to talk about or think about. I don't think fans want to even entertain that. But we see it in professional sports where the money's involved and teams are looking forward to next year and the draft and free agency and things like that. I think it would be a little naive, as maybe as gross or disappointing as it seems, to think that something like that can't happen at some point under this settlement.
If these things are going to be known, then don't Athletic, ESPN, whoever, don't you guys start doing like a salary cap figure? And here's who's spending what. Some schools would see, my example is Texas Tech has obviously been ahead of the curve. They are not afraid to go out and say, damn it, we have to compete. This is what we're going to do. And they're very proud of that. And yet sometimes they can get sensitive when you bring it up. My question is, why not, right? Make this public and let everyone see what's going on.
I would love that. I would love if everyone made it public. And you have seen some schools, I think Texas Tech being one of them, that has been, pretty explicit in terms of here's what we're going to designate for this sport or for this sport. The problem, it goes back to everything in college sports and in coaching and recruiting. Everyone's so secretive. Everyone feels like they don't want to give out an advantage. And so if you're a football program in your conference and maybe your men's basketball program or your women's basketball program is getting a little bit more, and so you have a little bit less, you don't want that out there, because then the teams in your conference you're recruiting against are going to be like, hey, don't go to school X. They're not even spending as much on football as we are. So it's still going to be really proprietary, I think. I don't know how many schools are going to want to be open and out there about how they're distributing the money, because, again, they view that it could be something that could be used against them on the recruiting trail.
Do you think this is headed towards where you like the NFL, where everybody knows what your salary cap is and what you are spending on players, and that's not necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, look, we keep talking about these under the table deals or over the cap. Honestly, those are probably going to be for kind of the top echelon of programs, the ones that were always spending the most, in the previous area. You're talking about Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, these schools that have traditionally had the highest budgets and the most resources. For the most part, even in the power conferences, they're trying to find where that $20.5 million is going to come from. And so I think generally, especially in a conference like the Big 12, where everyone's kind of on pretty even footing, maybe you have like a Texas Tech that's out there spending a little bit more, but you have a pretty good idea of like, all right, the other teams in this conference, they're spending around $15 million. And you probably, if you're recruiting similar players, you probably have a pretty good idea of what they're paying their quarterback or their star defensive end. And so you might have, whether it's kind of like a salary ladder, or you can't call it salary obviously, but revenue sharing kind of slots that you feel like players go in. But then I also think you're going to find these schools that find the inefficiencies, right? Or they find the best practices, whether you're moneyballing a team or whether you're realizing, hey, if we spend a little bit more money in our high school recruiting, maybe we can be better off, as opposed to try and go out in the portal. So just like with NIL and the transfer portal, I do think it's going to take a couple years for schools to kind of figure out what works best for them, or maybe what can help them be most competitive. And honestly, I think that'll be really interesting to kind of see and track from a media perspective, is what different schools do and how it works out on the field.
When you look at the 16 teams in the conference, and Justin, you covered Cincinnati for quite some time. Of course, they had the really nice run into the semifinals and where they are. Where do you, if we looked like at a tier, this is just overall a thought, where we know where Arizona State was dead last year in the preseason poll and they won it, and that's happened in the Big 12 before. But where do you think Cincinnati is in trying to find their spot? Are they closer to maybe moving up a notch, or are they kind of in a little bit of a treading water?
It feels, maybe especially in football, that they're treading water. And part of that is, historically Cincinnati was always a men's basketball program, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Bob Huggins and Mick Cronin. And, that's part of the fan base and the DNA of Cincinnati athletics. So you wonder, are they going to have to give a little bit more to men's basketball? Something with like Kansas, Kansas basketball, you have to think if any program is going to get a little bit more money, you're talking Kentucky men's basketball, North Carolina, Kansas. Is that then going to hurt your football program a little bit? We're not talking about huge differences in money, but if everyone else in the conference is spending $14 million and one school has $12 million or $11 million or something like that, it's going to make it that much tougher to kind of keep up. And so Cincinnati, I do think they're pretty well positioned for all the reasons they have been. They're in a big city. They have a good amount of history, but in the Big 12, where everyone's on pretty even footing, it's now a little bit harder, I feel like, to find those edges, to maybe get around a corner or find a competitive advantage in a way that potentially Texas Tech has found. They've done it off the field. We haven't necessarily seen the results on the field, but I think you're seeing which schools are maybe going to try and find a little bit of a competitive advantage in the Big 12. And I'm not sure that Cincinnati, I don't think they're at the bottom, but I don't know they're at the top either.
You wrote an article on June the 7th last week. Even after House versus NCAA settlement, college sports remains broken, but what else is new? Is it less broken now that the approval has come?
It's a good question. I kind of think the approval, whether you like it or don't, or agree with it or don't, I actually think it's just kind of like a way station. This isn't the big hard reset that we're moving to. I'm not sure what that'll look like, whether it's football breaking off or these super league things that we're talking about, or maybe it's Congress at some point stepping in and laying down federal legislation that, puts the settlement terms in stone. But even the most ardent supporters of the settlement have acknowledged, like, this is not the end. This is kind of a step that had to be taken. It needed to move forward, but there are still other steps that need to be taken. And so for me, the settlement is something that the NCAA and the power conferences, they had to do. One, because they were at risk of losing more high profile cases in court, and that would have been financially very tough for them, but also like they needed to kind of move forward in this NIL era, but this isn't the end of it. And so I think I don't even know if we get to the end of this 10-year run of the settlement, but the next 5 to 10 years, I think, are going to determine, is football breaking off and basically becoming its own minor league professional sport? And how does that impact everyone else? Is one of these super leagues where all of the FBS football programs kind of get wrapped up into it. We talked about Texas Tech. Cody Campbell's been mentioned as part of this potential presidential commission. Does that happen? Does some kind of super league come in and invest a bunch of private equity? I'm not sure, but this to me is kind of like a necessary but not final step to whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate your time, Justin, for being on the show from theathletic.com. Does a great job. That article up, and others. I even mentioned the one from June the 7th. We appreciate his time.